Okay, good evening, everybody. We're continuing with our path of Mesilas Yesharim, finding your path, and we're in chapter 7. And just to refresh what we've done up to now in this chapter Perek Zayin, is talking about the different parts of zrizas, of alacrity. And we said there were two parts to alacrity. Zrizas, one is to make sure you do the mitzvah, you start the mitzvah as soon as possible, and to complete it as soon as possible. And not to complete it as soon as possible because you just want to get rid of it and get it over and done with, but you want to make sure that nothing intervenes between the starting of doing the mitzvah and your completion of it. We studied that in detail, we brought psukim, and then we saw another idea that a mitzvah is called by or is attributed to the person who finishes a mitzvah. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu started to bring up Yosef's bones from Mitzrayim, it says that the Klal Yisrael were the ones who brought them up, because Moshe never finished the mitzvah, he wasn't allowed to Eretz Yisrael. So this is an example of how the mitzvah is termed, is the appellation, the name for that, who did that mitzvah is the one who completes it. We also saw a very scary warning that, God forbid, somebody who starts a mitzvah and doesn't finish it, he buries his wife and children. And we went into that in some detail as to a deeper understanding of what that might mean. So we're now halfway through the chapter, and it's the paragraph in my book that starts V'tireh. We're going to discuss tonight an idea that we've touched on before. I'll start reading and then we'll come back and discuss it. V'tireh sha'adam asher tilhat nafsho b'avodas boro v'adai shelo yis'atzel b'yasiyas mitzvosov ela tieh tnuaso eish hamehira ki lo yonuch v'lo yishkot ad im kila hadava lahashlimo. And you'll see that somebody who's aroused, who's awakened, who's inspired, his soul is inspired in the service of Hashem, Avodas Boro. Certainly he's not going to be lazy, he's not going to slack off in the doing of the mitzvah, the starting of the mitzvah and finishing the mitzvah. Rather, all his movements are going to be like the movements of fire, rushing quickly, like a flame, darting hither and thither, because he's inspired with his love of Hashem to finish the mitzvah. And he won't leave and he won't be rest, yishkot, until he finishes the Devar mitzvah to its completion. Va'omnam is bonanoid shekamo she'hazrizos hu toledis hislatus hapnimis Kain min hazrizos yivoled hislatus. This is really his key point here. Just as we see that internal inspiration motivates, inspires the physical action of a person, you see by the way the person acts that he's inspired from within. The way he moves, his quickness of movement, his alacrity, reveals what's going on inside him, inside his neshama, inside his nefesh. This quickness, this love, this fire, we talk about it being a person's fiery desire. So it's a two-way street. The same is also true in the reverse. That somebody who makes his actions quick, who goes and does the mitzvah in a quick way, who utilizes his body and motivates himself, goads himself to act in an alacritous fashion, he will find himself inspired. Acharei pa'ulas nimshechim halavavos. We spoke about that, the famous Sefer HaMitzvahs, that after the actions goes the acharei pa'ulas nimshechim halavavos, the heart, the inspiration. The feelings of person are influenced by their actions. Now this is a chidush which the Mesilas Yesharim brings down also, as I said, the Sefer Chinuch. And it's something interesting enough that Behavioral psychology took a few hundred more years to catch on to. Because a lot of behavioral psychology understands that if you find somebody who's depressed, what do? You get them to run around, you get them to physically activate themselves, because there is a construct in the human psyche and the personality of a person that when a person moves in an alacritous fashion, that inspires him to feel better, to feel motivated. It's not just that motivation motivates action, action motivates motivation. I think I told you this before, I once asked my Rebbe, I had a Talmud who had a problem getting up in time for davening. Sounds familiar? So I asked my Rebbe, what should I tell him to do? He said, tell him everything he does in the day, he should run. He should run to the dining room at lunchtime, even though he's dying to get to the dining room. Run. Why? Exactly this principle. Because by inculcating the physical actions, the actions have the chitzonius is mashpia on the pneumius. And the person will find that through his exterior actions, even if they're bone dry, and not motivated by any hislatus, any enthusiasm, any inspiration whatsoever, but it's impossible that it's not going to lead to inspiration. And we're going to see also, unfortunately, the reverse is also true. That however inspired a person is, but if he's lazy in his actions, that will affect, that will minimize his inspiration. He will find himself less inspired and less inspired by virtue of the fact that his physical actions are basically influencing his panemius. And this is something, maybe we spoke about this before also, in the understanding of why we put the tefillin on the arm before we put the tefillin on the head. A person tends to think, we tend to think, hashkach v'rishona, the first outlook, the person might think that seeing as a person thinks a certain way, so his concepts, his thoughts inform his feelings, and his feelings therefore go out and instruct his actions. That's true, but as we're saying now, the reverse is also true. And what happens is also the other, and that's why we put the tefillin on the arm first. We mishabed our actions to Hashem. The arm, the instrument of action, that we first of all put the tefillin on. The tefillin, and really if you think about it, the tefillin is a kind of a strap, it's a kind of a dedication. I'm dedicating my actions to what's written in this box. And then one of the halachas of the tefillin is that it has to be pointing towards the heart, because the action informs the feeling. The heart is the seat of the feeling. And then the feeling also works its way up to the thought and the hislatus and the intellectual and the cognitive, emotional feelings of a person. That's the process. Now also what he's going to go on to say, and maybe I'm skipping ahead too much, is that you see the majority of the mitzvahs are physical. Vast majority of the mitzvahs are physical things, they're not things of the mind. We have a mitzvah to love Hashem, to fear Hashem, to be dovek in Hashem, but the vast majority of the mitzvahs, if you go through them, are about action, waving a lulav, putting on tefillin, tzitzis, eating certain things, not eating certain things, refraining from doing certain actions on the Shabbos, doing certain actions on Shabbos, and Yom Tov and Yom Kippur. The vast panoply of Hashem's mitzvahs are pretty much ruba de ruba actions. Why? Because the actions are much easier to access than the thoughts and the feelings. A person can do something even if he doesn't have his heart in it, and even if he really doesn't want to do it, but he has access to his physical actions, he's in control of those much more than he's in his control of his emotions. And so Hashem did a chesed to us by giving the vast majority of the mitzvahs into the realm of action, which is accessible to us, and which will allow us, if we do those actions, even if we do them in a fairly minimal way, but inevitably, if we do them, they will lead to a hislatus. And the more we do them, and the better we do them, the greater and the greater will our feeling and our connection and our enthusiasm and our inspiration be. Let's see the second half of the sentence. Va'omnam, Ismeinu no shekmo hazrizus, hu toledes harlotus pnimis. Just like as we said that physical enthusiasm, physical action, is a product of an internal quickening, awakening, inspiration. So also from a person's acting in an alacritous fashion with zrizus, yivoled hislatus, there will be engendered within him, there will be born within him enthusiasm and inspiration. V'hainu kimi shemargish atzmo b'maaseh hamitzvah kamo shehu mamaher tunoso hachitzoyna kein hinei hu gorem shetiv'a bo tunuosoi hapanimis kamo ken v'acheshek v'achefetz yizgaber bo v'yelech. Translation. As we said before, just like the interior enthusiasm informs the exterior actions, so similarly the other way around. Exterior actions, alacrity, will give birth in him to this enthusiasm, and that is that me who feels himself, he spurs himself to act, to do the mitzvah in a way which is fast, and he speeds up his actions, and he goads himself into doing it in the proper way, in an external way, just the actions. Similarly, he will find that this causes inside him a burning of an awakening, a quickening of his interior movement, which is the cheshek, the desire, and the chefetz, another word for his wanting, and that will grow and grow and grow inside him. Achim misnaheg bikfedus. Similarly, if he conducts himself with heaviness, so betnuas evarov, in the conduct of his limbs, he moves in a slow way, he does everything slowly. So gam tenuas ruchoi tishka v'tichper. Similarly, the movement of his spirit will sink and be extinguished. This is something that experience testifies to. Let me just see if there's a note here that I want to comment on. No, I think we can go on. V'omnam, however, v'omnam kava yudato shahanitzra שהנרצה יוסף בעבודת הבריס ברוך שמו הוא חפץ הלב ותשוקס הנשמה. You already know that what is principally desired by Hashem is the heart. What's desired by Hashem more than anything in the service of Hashem is the desire of the heart and the yearning of the spirit, of the soul. And I just want to point out here, of course, this shouldn't be misunderstood to say that that's the be-all and end-all. The Nefesh HaChaim goes to great length to criticize people who think that the most important thing is the heart. He says the most important thing is the physical action, is the doing of the mitzvah. If you don't actually do the action, you have nothing. If you do the action with tremendous enthusiasm, you'll have 1,000,000. In other words, let's say on the scale of 1 to 1,000,000, if you do the mitzvah without any kind of inspiration whatsoever, you have a 1. If you do the mitzvah with tremendous inspiration, enthusiasm, and everything else, you have 1,000,000. But if you take away the action, you'll have 6 zeros. So vital, and I want to say vital, but as important and as desired by Hashem is the chukas halev, the desire of the heart, the desire to connect. That's the most important thing. I'm just pointing out that he doesn't mean that to the exclusion of the rock bottom foundation of the actual asiyas mitzvah. That's the sine qua non. That's that without which nothing gets off the ground. But nevertheless, that is principally what Hashem wants for us, given that, of course, we're doing the mitzvah itself. For whom David HaMelech mishalel bechelko hatov va'omer Ka'ayel ta'arog al afike mayim, kein nafshi ta'arog elecha elokim. So nafshi le'elokim, etc. David HaMelech praised, or he realized that he had in himself, and he was happy about that he had this particular midah of tremendous chukah, yearning to serve Hashem with all his heart. And he was happy that that was chelko, his good portion. And he says in Tehillim, ka'ayil, like a heart, like a deer, tarog, thirst, cries longingly, alafike mayim, for the parting of the water, for the brooks, for the stream. Kein nafshi tarog elecha elokim. Similarly, my soul cries longingly for you, Hashem. Tzoma nafshi lelokim. My soul thirsts for God. And of course, David HaMelech realized he had this midah, and he felt very fortunate and blessed that he had that. And we see from that that's a tremendous thing, that if a person has this naturally. Again, it says, Nichsafa v'gam kolsa nafshi l'chatzros Hashem. Again, David HaMelech in Tehillim, Samach Gimel. Nichsafa, my soul yearned and desired for the chatzros Hashem, the courtyards of Hashem, meaning the Torah. And again, Sama l'cha nafshi, kama l'cha besari. My soul yearns for you, my flesh pines for you. V'ulam ha'adam asher ein hachemda zois hazois lo hetes bo karui. But somebody, the other end of the scale, let's say, from David HaMelech, whose enthusiasm and his inspiration is not what it ought to be. Eitzah tova hilo, a good piece of advice for him is, she's dares beritzono kedei sheyemoshech mizeh, that he should chivi, they say in English, he should spur himself with his desire. He should get himself moving in order that it will be drawn, it will follow from that. Shetivoleid bo, that will be born inside him, hachemda hateva, the bateva, excuse me. This, it will become, as they say in English, second nature. This enthusiasm, this inspiration will eventually become second nature, again through this process of going through the motions. Even though we talk about going through the motions being a bad thing, but in this case, going through the motions is exactly what leads to an interior inspiration. Ki hatanua hatzichitzona mo'eres hapanimis, as we've been saying, because the outside action awakens the inner action, so to speak, the action of the soul. And as I mentioned before, also for sure that our outside actions are much more under our control. They're given over to us much more than our internal feelings. Achim yishtamish mima shebeyodo, but if a person utilizes what is in his hands, meaning his external behavior, yigne gam ma she'ena beyodo behemshech, he will also acquire eventually what is not in his hands. Ki sivoleid boy hasimcha hapanimis, because through doing the mitzvahs, even as I said, even in a way which isn't with enthusiasm, inevitably there will be born within him a internal simcha, an internal joy, v'hachefetz, and a desire, v'hachemda, and a longing, mikoach mashehu mislahet b'dunoso barotzon, through that he has been able to awaken in his actions through his desire. V'huma shahaya hanavi omer, that's what it says in Hosea. V'neida nirdefa ledasas Hashem. V'neida, in other words, and to know, nirdefa ledas Hashem, we have to pursue the knowledge of Hashem. In other words, in order to reach this das Hashem, which of course ultimately is impossible, but as much as we can, that we have to pursue the knowledge. That which is given into our hands is the physical, or in this particular case, the doing of the mitzvahs, which will lead us to this knowledge of Hashem. That we have to do in order if we want to know. V'neida, neda faladas Hashem. Chasiv also says in Hosea in Yud Aleph, Achrei Hashem yelchu ka'aryeh sha'ag, that the Jewish people should follow after Hashem like a roaring lion. Okay, so there's a lot to be said about this, but I think what I want to do is to start the next parak, at least. So the next parak is a short parak, and in fact, maybe we can even try and finish this tonight. Parak Ches, chapter 8, B'derech Nias Hasrizos. How does a person acquire this meter of alacrity? Up till now, we've talked about the value of alacrity, and I guess I'm just thinking now, really, we did actually speak about it in the last part about how you acquire the meter of alacrity, but let's see what he has to say. Hinehem tzoim asher nikna bo hazrizos heim osam asher nikna bom zehirus. Zehirus and zrizos are like two sides of the same coin. Zehirus, watchfulness, is to do with mitzvahs. Losar said that we should be careful not to transgress the Torah. And the mitzvah of zrizus, of alacrity, is concerned with the positive mitzvahs, of the do mitzvahs, that we should do those, as we've been talking about, immediately with enthusiasm. And he's saying now that the same ways that we acquired the midah of zehirus, of watchfulness, of care, of vigilance. So similarly, the midah of alacrity, of zrizus, the means are essentially the same. And madregosehem, the levels, and we'll see what that means in a minute, the levels of people who are searching, trying to achieve the midah of zehirus, that parallel is going to be parallel to in the midah of zrizus. And as I wrote above, Ki anyonim karov zeh lezeh ma'od, because the two subjects are really very close together. Ve'ein hefresh beineihem, and there really is no difference between them. Ela shezeh ba'asim v'zeh beloved, except that zrizus concerns asin, positive mitzvahs, do mitzvahs. V'zeh and zehirus concerns lovim, don't do mitzvahs. Ukasher yisames etzel ha'odem godel erech ha-mitzvahs rov havoso behem vadai she is oire libo el ha'avoda v'lo yisrape mimenu. So he's hinting to something that he said before here. As we said before, that a person has to, he's used this phrase a few times, to misames. As we said before, that a person lives in two worlds. He lives in the intellectual world, the world of the mind, and he lives in what I call an emotional reality. A person has his mind in order to satisfy himself that there's a God in the world, but he has to internalize that. It has to become, that's what we say, v'yadata hayom, that's an intellectual appreciation, v'hevosa elavavecha. That has to be internalized. The person has to live up within that intellectual realization. So similarly, just as a person has to yitamet, make true, he has to live this out. As we said before, the great value of the mitzvahs when it comes to making sure that he doesn't transgress a mitzvah, and we went into great details about that. So, and also the great obligation that a person has with regard to doing mitzvahs, staying away from mitzvahs lo sa'aseh. So vadai, similarly, a person should yisoreh, to awaken himself, his heart, to the service, and he shouldn't slacken off from doing it, because just in the same way that he's made actualized within inside his heart the great value of what a mitzvah is, and how there's nothing more dear than it, and that's really the only thing at the end of the day that really means anything. So all of these things he discussed at great length. When a person introspects on that and understands how really nothing really exists in the world except the Ratzon Hashem, and when he does the Ratzon Hashem, he's being koinah for himself a place in Olam Haba. And each mitzvah corresponds to a certain aspect of that Olam Haba. how great the value of the mitzvah is. And really this entire world is just a place where the mitzvahs, as we saw right at the beginning, where it's possible to do these mitzvahs, the emtsoim, the methods which bring us to Olam Haba. And that all this world is really about is to be a traklin, to be a prose door, a corridor, an antechamber, a vestibule to Olam Haba. And the greatness of a person's obligation in their regard. Because that's really all that he's created for. So with this knowledge, Vadai she's Oire Liboy ala Avoida Velo Yisrape Mimenu. However, Ma Shiyuchal Lahagbia Hisorus Hazehu HaMistaklis Barov HaTova SheHaKadosh Baruch Hu Osei Im HaOdam B'chol Eis B'chol Sha'ah. Now he's saying something a little different. As we said before, just 1 second. Yeah. However, what will cause to grow in a person, his awakening, his inspiration in this matter of zrizus, of alacrity, haistaklus barov tovos shekadosh baruch hu oisei im ha'adam chol eis v'chol sha'ah. It's a quotation really from the Tefillah, is to examine, to mistakel. Mistakel doesn't mean to look. It means to look with the intention of discerning. The issa of looking at a woman is not to see a woman. The issa of is histaklus benashim, is to look with the intention, with a certain intention. So certainly, just like as the issa of histaklus is to look with intent, so similarly, the word here is precise, that a person has to be mistakel barov hatovas, to look deeply into all of the good things that Hashem does for us. Histaklus barov hatovas shekadosh baruch hu osei im ha'adam b'chol eis v'chol sha'ah. All of course, that's the tefillah. We say that every day. All the good things, the tova secha, the niflo secha, v'haniflos hagodolos, and the great miracles, wonders. Sha'osa imoy me'es haleda ad hayom ha'acharon. I don't know if you've seen, and let's just translate this, and to appreciate the great wonders that Hashem does with a person from the time he's born until his last day. I was just going to mention that you see recently, not so recently now, but outside bathrooms they put this sheet which has the bracha on one side, and on the other side it examines the human body and the amount of blood that's pumped through the body, and you see these guys carrying these sort of great jugs and bottles, like huge bottles of all the water that a person needs, and all the things that Hashem provides all the time. In fact, I think it says on that sheet that I think it was Chaim Volozhin, if a person really thought about the miracles going on inside his body, that the body was able to extract nutrients and sustain him and expel the waste products from his body. And every time he went to the bathroom, he'd send a letter home saying it worked. These are things we take for granted, but part of the point of brachot is to, maybe the main point of brachot, certainly a bracha which is done for nen and for things we're nen from, or brichas of hodah, of thanking of Hashem, is to sensitize us to the things that are going on all the time. The brachas we make on food, the brachas, the fact that the smell, brachas on smell, all of these things, the nature of a person is that a person becomes habituated. A person becomes in a way saturated and becomes less sensitized. And of course, like every meter that a person has, this can be a good thing. It's amazing to me how in the midst of the Second World War in the Warsaw Ghetto, you hear that there were things like there were concerts, there were theater groups, I believe. Why? How is that possible? The fact of the matter is that a person has such a desire to live that even when things are really bad, that somehow he manages to desensitize himself from it. I mean, this is one of the things that unfortunately happened in this past war in Gaza. I don't know about you, but it becomes increasingly difficult to say every day the Tehillim that we say after davening. And yet the situation is no less dire, maybe even more perilous. And yet the nature of a person is that when he's living in something, a dangerous situation or a difficult situation, he becomes accustomed to it. So brachas are one of the things that sensitize ourselves to the things which we can become desensitized to, which are bad. For example, like all the tovos, all the goodness that Hashem gives us, the fact that kon neshima, every breath is another gift from Hashem, the fact that food is a gift, sight is a gift, the whole workings of the body is totally miraculous from our first day to the day we die. Kimol kol masha sheyarbe listakel ulisboinem b'devarim ha'ela. As I said, the more a person is mistakel, not just looks, but he examines. He looks with the intention of seeing the goodness of Hashem. And if you read Rav Avigdor Miller's writings on this, he talks at great length about, he goes to great lengths to examine in great detail all the goodness of the things that Hashem does for us. How food smells nice because Hashem wants us to eat, to preserve our body. That food has nice colors. Oranges are orange. Grapes are green. All these things to delight the eye as well as the palate. Well, it's bonen b'devarim eila. Hine yarbe lahakir la'atzmoi choiva rabba el hakel hametiv loy v'yu eila ha'emtsoim l'shalo yisatzel v'yisrapem avodo. So how can I be laggardly? How can I be lazy in my serving of Hashem when I see all of the good things that He's doing to me? But of course, the more a person examines the goodness, the good things that Hashem is doing for him, so the more, therefore, he will be motivated to understand the great degree of obligation that he has in this regard. Maybe I'll just finish with one story, this idea that a person has to identify, to be makir the tov, he has to recognize the good. In English, the word gratitude doesn't have this connotation, but in Hebrew, hakarat tov and kfui tov. In English, you have gratitude or ingratitude, two positions. But there's a third position in Hebrew, which is the lack of recognition. The good is there all the time, all the time. The good is Hashem is good. Everything He does is good. A person can choose to recognize the good, hakarat tov, or he can be kafui tov. He actually has to cover up. Ingratitude in Hebrew is the covering up of the good that surrounds a person. And that's what he's talking about here, is to make all his efforts to examine in greater and greater detail. If you look at the Dayenu in the Haggadah, in the Pesach Seder, all of those different steps, if you've done this for enough, if you've taken out of Egypt, it would be enough. If you've given us the Torah, it would be enough. If you brought us to Hasina, it would be enough. If you brought us to Eretz Yisrael, it would be enough. If you've given the space of Mikdash, it would be enough. Why is it that we identify all these things? Why don't we just go to the end and say, if Dayenu, why? Because to the extent that a person can identify parts of a hatava, of a good thing that's being done for him, so will increase his gratitude. Let's say, for example, a person drinks a cup of coffee in the morning, and he's thankful to Hashem that he has this coffee to wake him up. But if he looked at this cup of coffee and he really analyzed it, his gratitude would be much greater. Let's look at this coffee. For me to have this cup of coffee, Some Peruvian peasant had to get up very early in the morning and climb up to some high altitude and pick coffee beans one by one. And they had to bring it down all the way down the mountain. And then they had to roast it in this huge silo. And then they had to have this huge ship to bring it all the way to America, where they're going to pack it up. And of course the ship, where did the ship come from? The ship had to be built of iron, all the iron foundries. And of course, that's even without talking about the cup. The cup had to be made in a kiln by a skilled pottery maker. The more a person analyzes something, the more he appreciates it. And the more a person appreciates something, the more is his feeling of that it's incumbent upon me to do the will of the Boireh. The more I recognize what Hashem does for me, the more gratitude I have for Hashem, and the more gratitude I have for Hashem, the more indebted I will feel. And this will, of course, spur me, encourage me to serve Hashem better and better. Okay, we're going to pause here. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue next week. Thank you very much.